very pleased to be collaborating with the EPA through our strategic partnership on today's event, which is the first of a series of circular economy conversations. And the purpose of these conversations is to generate discussion about the circular economy and help inform policy thanks to the input of key stakeholders like yourselves and expert practitioners. We wanted to hold this event today to support discussion about food waste prevention and to make sure that your voice can be heard in the National Food Waste Prevention Roadmap Consultation, which is open until the 24th of March, and we will share a link to that in the chat area. We would encourage everyone to make a submission to this really important consultation, and to help facilitate that, we'll have today's discussion, and the Miro boards which we'll be using for the discussion will be left open and accessible to all participants until the 24th. So you can use that as a reference point in your own submissions if you choose to make one. We will also be including the key recommendations from the discussion today in our own submission as well. And while the event was organised obviously to respond to the roadmap, I think it's become really obvious that the vulnerability of our food systems has become more and more apparent in the last 3 weeks, as we've seen the war in the Ukraine having an immediate and devastating human impact, but also in parallel, highlighting our interdependence and the risk that this poses to food security, both nationally and globally. And this really demonstrates that food waste is an economic, environmental, social, and ethical issue, and shows, I think, more than ever, that we really need to look at how we value food and how we can avoid loss and waste all the way up the supply chain. And that's what we're here to discuss today. Here at the Rediscovery Centre, we're Ireland's National Centre for a Circular Economy, and we're a creative movement connecting people, ideas and resources to support low carbon living and the transition to a circular economy. We have 4 strategic goals: to mobilise education, demonstration, advocacy and collaboration. For example, this event today is designed around collaboration with you as key stakeholders to develop insights and recommendations, and to support advocacy through our policy submission and to support policy development. And it's being informed by our education and demonstration work in the centre as well, including our own kitchen, garden and cafe. And this is one of many areas in which we're working to try and provide an evidence-based policy development through collaboration and research. We're growing our research team at the moment, and we welcome opportunities to meet with you and collaborate with you. So please do get in touch if you're interested in working with us. So to help frame today's discussion, we're delighted to have a number of experts in this area to hand to share their insights. First of all, I'll be welcoming Stephanie Long, who's Manager of Circular Economy Implementation at the EPA, and she will share the EPA's work and insights in food waste prevention. We'll then hear from Brian Quirk. Sorry, I'll just share my screen there so you can see who we're talking about. We'll then hear from Brian Quirk, who's Assistant Principal Officer at the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications. And we'll hear from Brian what the roadmap contains. We'll then hear from 4 experts from 4 different parts of the food supply chain. First of all, in relation to household food waste, we'll hear from Odile LeBlanc, who's Manager of Food Waste Prevention Programme at the EPA. We'll also hear from Kenneth Keavey about food loss and waste at farm level. And he runs Green Earth Organics, which is a 40-acre organic farm near Galway with a nationwide box delivery scheme. We'll hear from Christopher Hill, who works with Operations Development Director at FoodCloud, an award-winning social enterprise with a mission to transform surplus food into opportunities and make the world a kinder place. And he'll be talking about food waste and loss at retail and distribution level. And finally, we'll hear about food waste at restaurant and food services level with Conor Spacey, who is Chef and Culinary Director at FoodSpace Ireland. We'll then invite you all into a breakout room of most interest to you on one of those 4 themes. And there you'll be able to share your ideas and recommendations for the National Food Waste Prevention Roadmap. And following that, there'll be an opportunity for questions and answers with these same experts. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Stephanie Long to provide a welcome from the EPA. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Claire. Can you hear me okay now? So yeah, good morning. My name is Stephanie Long. I'm so pleased to be here this morning for the first circular economy conversation of the year. Our team in the EPA, we work to implement the EPA's circular economy programme, and we work to prevent waste across many sectors. And we do a lot of our work in partnership, and we've had the pleasure of working as a partner with the Rediscovery Centre since 2018. So this is the 4th year of our partnership. And we're ultimately all working towards the same goal. We're all working together. We ultimately want to see an Ireland where the circular economy ensures that everyone uses less resources and prevents waste, and at the same time that we can have sustainable economic growth. We have 7 priority areas, and on one of these, a big one that we've been working on for years is food waste. And we know globally that food waste contributes to up to 10% of man-made greenhouse gas emissions. And that we also know that more than a quarter of all food that's produced is wasted. And in fact, in Ireland, more than 1 million tonnes of food is wasted every year. So reducing food waste is one of the most positive things we can do for the environment, for climate change, and for society. And as Claire said, it's also an ethical issue. So you'll be hearing from my colleague, Odile Block. She leads the EPA's work in this area, and she has huge expertise in the area. And so you'll be hearing from her. I'd just like to mention a couple of other areas that the EPA does work to help reduce food waste. And I suppose I just wanted to say a couple of words about the EPA's research programme. We have a large research programme, and there are 4 themes. And one of these themes is a green and circular economy. So supporting research that helps us address gaps in information about the circular economy, in particular food waste. So just to give you an example of a piece of research we funded recently was to look at commercial food waste. In Ireland, it's estimated that there are about 200,000 tonnes of food waste every year, but we had very little information about the type of food being wasted and the reasons for that waste being generated. And there was a really nice piece of research done that identified the 4 areas where, in fact, 75% of the waste was coming from. And there were a number of recommendations that came from that research. And one of these was that industry need funding and technical support to help address food waste. And that's one of the things that we do through another research programme. And a really nice example of this is a project where we fund an urban mushroom farm to use coffee grounds as a base for the mushroom substrate. So coffee grounds are collected from local cafes, and those are used to grow mushrooms. And they're also analysing other waste products to see can they be used to grow high value mushrooms. So that's a really nice example of using food waste to create more food, a really nice example of the circular economy in action. So I'd just like to finish by really strongly encouraging you to take this opportunity to have your say on how we tackle food waste over the next years. The roadmap, I know Brian will talk about this in a moment, but it's a really interesting read. It sets the context out very clearly, but it sets out very clearly the actions that we all need to take to have our food waste by 2030. And there's a short template also to help you with your responses, and so you can write as much or as little as you'd like to. And finally, I'd just like to say I'm really interested to hear your views and insights this morning, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And do feel free to share the links to those pieces of research in the chat. I think it would be really, really interesting. I'll share as well the EPA's food waste page, which is an excellent resource as well. So thank you very much for that outline. And there's some really great research happening there. I'd now like to ask Brian Quirk from the Department of Environment to provide an outline of the roadmap. Thank you, Brian. Sorry, Brian, if you just unmute. Thank you.
Sorry, can you hear and see the presentation okay?
Perfect, yeah, just change the display settings there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is that okay? Fine, great, thanks very much, Claire, and thanks. everybody, and good morning, everybody, and delighted to be here this morning, and thanks very much to the Rediscovery Centre for this opportunity to present to you today the draft National Food Waste Prevention Roadmap. My name is Brian Quirk. I'm based in the Circular Economy Strategic Policy Division in the Department of the Environment, Climate Communications, and food waste is one of the key policy areas of focus under the division's responsibility. So I'm very much looking forward to the discussion today at today's workshop. So again, thanks Claire and the Rediscovery Centre for organising today's event. So as highlighted from our previous speaker, just in terms of the context around food waste, so we all know that growing, processing and transporting food, they all use a significant amount of resources, and tackling food waste is one of the key steps we can take to I suppose support our transition to a circular economy and combat climate change as well, because food waste in itself is a significant contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. As you can see there, about 8 to 10% of total greenhouse gas emissions. As worldwide, we generate about a quarter of our food that is produced is wasted, so it's a significant issue. And as highlighted earlier, Ireland has generated about 1.1 million tonnes in 2019. And that's for the latest year for 2019, and that excludes the food waste arising at primary production stage. And there is research that is currently being finalised through the EPA research programme on food waste and food losses in primary production. So we should have figures on that published hopefully later this year. So that just gives you the general context, and food waste occurs at all stages of the food supply chain. It's not one particular food supply chain that it's a particular issue. It's in all stages of it, be it crops from harvested produce that may damage for some reason due to weather conditions or demands and fluctuations, be it retailers throwing away food because of imperfect stock or out-of-date stock, restaurants needing to throw away food because customers are not eating all the food that's being ordered. And also the whole area of understanding food waste, where it's being generated, and the need for food waste measurement for businesses to understand where food waste occurs. And then obviously at the household level, you can see 250,000 tonnes or over 250,000 tonnes generated in 2019 from householders. And that arises from a number of reasons, for example, overbuying food and also not using food by its use-by date. So that just gives you the general context of where we're at in Ireland at the moment. And this is recognised at the international level as the big issue, and it's been driven through the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Out of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, we have Goal 12 and particularly Goal 12.3, which Ireland has signed up to in 2015, and that's by 2030 to have per capita global food waste at the retail and consumer levels, and also reduce food losses along production and supply chains, including post-harvest losses. So that's what the commitment that we've signed up to. And there's a lot of activity at the EU level as well through the Circular Economy Action Plan and also the Farm to Fork strategy, which just to highlight two particular areas of focus there is the commitment at the EU level to bring in binding targets to reduce food waste across the EU. And there's a lot of activity in that space at the moment that the European Commission are working on at the moment. And the other area is around date marking, again, looking at revising the rules based on consumer research. And again, that's very active currently at Commission level. At the national level, we have the Waste Action Plan for a Circular Economy that was published in 2020. And there's a whole chapter dedicated to food waste, focusing on food waste management, food waste prevention, and also redistribution and infrastructure around food. And that's a particular focus in the department's work at the moment, is trying to implement those measures over the 5-year period of that Waste Action Plan. And then we have the climate action plans in 2019 and 2021, which sets out the commitment to reduce food waste by 50% by 2030. And also on the agricultural and food space, we have the Food Vision 2030 that was published in August last year, which also sets out the commitment around the National Food Waste Prevention Roadmap. And then more recently, before Christmas, we've had the publication of the Whole of Government Circular Economy Strategy, which sets out the transition for all sectors and government bodies across the government, whole of government approach to the transition to the circular economy. So the starting point for the roadmap is around the waste action plan. So we have this Sustainable Development Goal commitment, and also targets come down the track from the EU. So we need a roadmap to get it to that space in 2030 to reduce our food waste by 2030. And we're now in 2022, so we don't have a lot of time. So we need to set out clear actions how we're going to get to that goal. So the waste action plan set out the commitment to work with a range of stakeholders to develop a food waste prevention roadmap, sets out those series of actions to deliver the reductions necessary to halve our food waste by 2030. Also, just to highlight the circular economy bill, which there's activity going on in relation to the circular economy bill at the moment. And this bill will importantly place the National Food Waste Prevention Roadmap or the strategy on the statutory footing. So that will make the ongoing development of policy in relation to food waste prevention a legal requirement. So just in terms of the roadmap itself, so this was a priority focus last year in looking to set out a roadmap to get the work going on this. And we identified a number of key stakeholders initially to work on development of this roadmap, namely the Environmental Protection Agency as the lead on the National Food Waste Prevention Programme, but also other organisations such as the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine as the lead on this Sustainable Development Goal 12.3, and also in the context of Food Vision 2030 and primary production being a key stage of the food supply chain as well. We also work with others such as Board BIA in terms of their work on the Origin Green programme, the Food Safety Authority of Ireland from a food safety point of view, and also FoodCloud, given their valuable experience and insights into the whole area of food donation and just in general on the food waste prevention space. So, so I suppose the key message really from this work is there's a lot of stages in this whole area of food supply and where food waste is generated. So it's really trying to bring about a coherent approach, bringing everything together into one policy space and looking how as a joint collective that we can work together to get on a trajectory to reduce our food waste by 50%. So a draft was prepared and decision was taken then. It was the right time to go out for public consultation on the roadmap, and this was launched then in January 2020. January just gone, on the 27th of January in 2022, for an 8-week period until the 24th of March, which is next week. So just to give you a flavour of the components, so it's approximately a 30-page document. And it sets out the context because it's the first roadmap, if you like. So we really need to set out the context on food waste and where it's occurring and gathering the data, and also putting all the policy around food waste at EU level and national level in one space around food waste. And it also looks at the key sectors along the food supply chain. And then we're talking about the baseline data because we need to set the baseline data that links to the 2030 target, so we can therefore have a clear view of where we need to get to in the intervening period between now and 2030. So as I mentioned earlier on, there's a lot of activity at EU level looking at targets, but also a regulation and the legislative requirements around reporting of food waste for the first time this year into the EU. So all member states are required to report food waste generated for the different stages of the supply chain for the year 2020 by June this year. So it is expected that that will be the baseline data set that will link to the 2030 target, but that is subject to the EU Commission's work on this whole space around the targets. But currently that's the expectation that 2020 will be the baseline data. So the EPA are taking the lead on the reporting on the food waste data for Ireland in June this year. So we're very much looking forward to that. And after the roadmap is developed, I would suspect that then we'll be looking at establishing that as the baseline that will link to the 2030 target. So once the baseline is set, then it would seem pertinent then to look at interim milestones and targets to make sure we're keeping on the trajectory to reduce our food waste by 50% by 2030. Another key component currently in the draft roadmap is looking at the whole area of food waste measurement. And there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in relation to that in terms of getting the sectors to measure the food waste. So this is the only way to understand where the issues lie and where the issues occur and why food waste is being generated, and therefore how the sectors can identify then measures to reduce the food waste and look at reporting that food waste. And then it also sets out the context on the reporting of food waste then back into the EU, which was occurring on an annual basis. The roadmap is really a call to action as well for all sectors to commit to reduce food waste, and this pledge, measure, reduce angle to it is. And this is again looking at identifying food waste in the first instance, looking to measure it, and then identifying actions to reduce food waste. Other key components currently in the draft roadmap is looking at the whole area of food waste segregation and food donation. And again, these are strong areas of focus in the Waste Action Plan that was published in 2020. And food waste segregation is an important component, particularly on the household side as well. It has been shown that, you know, once householders start to segregate the food waste, then it becomes more into the consciousness of, oh, this is actually food waste that I'm actually creating. So therefore, it will be a good pathway to understand then, okay, if I'm generating this amount of food waste, then I need to start looking at ways then to prevent food waste. So there's a number of activities in this whole area of food waste segregation, and looking at areas of awareness raising. There's a food waste recycling working group being chaired by the department with key bodies on that group, looking at ways of improving food waste segregation and the uptake of brown bin. We've had a successful work pilot projects in the past, looking at, for example, the role of the kitchen food waste caddy in terms of making it easier for the household or to manage their food waste as well. So there's areas of work there that the roadmap tries to capture as well. The area of food donation is a very important area as well. Again, there's measures in there such as investigating the potential impact of prohibiting the destruction of edible food in advance of its use-by date, and looking at investigating the regulatory and legal barriers to Good Samaritan acts of donation, and whether mandatory donation of edible food from retail outlets, for example, would reduce waste. So it's looking at that particular area. Communications and awareness, it's an ongoing journey to try and change the behavior and the mindset right in terms of all sectors to engage in reducing food waste, and it's looking to strengthening that and delivering sustained communications, and particularly the Stop Food Waste programme, and continuing to have a very valuable role as they have had done up to now, and continuing that important role in terms of the awareness piece. The role of research and innovation, and that again was mentioned earlier on, and trying to look at that as in a coherent manner, because there's a lot of activity in the space as well, and it's bringing it all together in one view and looking at where the priorities lie, and trying to reduce duplication of work, and trying to communicate where research has been done already, and seeing whether that can be applied in a successful manner in areas that may not be aware that research is being undertaken, and look at particular topics such as, for example, date marking, the role of date marking, the whole area of climate and greenhouse gases generated from food waste, and also sustainable food packaging. The role of green public procurement is a focus currently in the draft as well. The EPA have published EPA green public procurement guidance last year, and that has a particular focus on, for example, the procurement of food and catering services, and food waste prevention, again, is a key element of that. And then finally, looking at the whole area of how we evaluate the progress of the roadmap and making sure we're keeping on track on that trajectory to reduce food waste over the next decades to 2030, and updating the roadmap accordingly to make sure we're still on message and tracking and looking at the data to see, are we on making significant progress in reducing our food waste by 50% by 2030. So that's really just a snapshot. Again, the draft roadmap is available at the links there, and I think it's going to be available on the chat as well later on. So we would very much welcome submissions in advance of the deadline, which is the half-5 on 24th of March 2022. So thanks again to the Discovery Centre for the opportunity to speak today, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion in today's workshop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian, and that provides a really great basis for our discussion in the next part of the workshop today. As Brian mentioned, there are a lot of stages set out in the consultation document. There are 5 key areas that are highlighted along the supply chain, and it's with those in mind that we've structured the event today. So we'll be hearing, first of all, from a number of experts on the different stages, as I mentioned earlier, from household, retail, production and manufacturing, and the third, restaurants. Sorry, I was losing my train of thought there. And restaurants as well. So those 4 stages. And to introduce those and to introduce our ideation and engaging session, I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Steve, who is in policy and communications. Thanks very much, Steve.
Hello, everybody. So as Claire mentioned, I work in the Rediscovery Centre in a policy and communications role. I'm going to share my screen because we're just going to hear from some industry experts to get started with. Let me know if everybody can see this, okay? Good to go? Okay, great. Okay, right. Let me see now. Whoops.
Hi, everybody. My name is Odile LeBlanc, and I work in the Environmental Protection Agency, where I lead the food waste prevention team. The EPA implements the food waste prevention program, and we look at food waste dealing with 3 strands. That is food waste in the home, food waste in the food supply chain and in the retail sector, and then food waste in hospitality and food services. And we know that Ireland wastes around 1 million tonnes of food waste. And when it comes to the home, that's about 250,000 tonnes. I lead the team and I enjoy the work we do. It's very varied. We deal with organizations. We try and develop supports for businesses that might help them measure their food waste and then reduce it. And we also run stopfoodwaste.ie, which is the national campaign to inform people, generate awareness around food waste, and also provide handy tips for things that we can do to reduce food waste in the home. One of the things that we do as part of our work in the food waste prevention program is we conduct studies on behaviours and attitudes by Irish citizens when it comes to food waste. And our most recent survey that we did late last year, we found that there's very strong acknowledgement that food waste is an important issue. But we also found that not everybody is aware of the amount of food waste that they produce, and they may not see that there is a problem that needs to be dealt with. A key finding from our survey was that some of the good food organisation behaviours, things like checking the fridge before shopping, making a list, are followed by people who are more conscious about food waste day to day. So that highlights the need that we need to make people be aware of the amount of food waste that they produce and how they can take actions in their day-to-day life to reduce that food waste. What we've also found is that younger age groups say that they would like to reduce their food waste, but they don't know how. This highlights a potential educational gap We have also found that 9 in 10 people agree that consumers have a role in to play in preventing food waste. And we do find that there's some strong behaviors that people already undertake. We know that 3 in 4 people make a shopping list, but we also find that people say the main reason that they throw away food is because food passes use by date. And we know that in general, people say that they're great at checking use by dates when they go shopping, but that falls by the wayside when you bring the food home and you tend not to check and keep track of food in our fridge. So these are quite basic steps that we need to remind people that they can do. And this is where stopfoodwaste.ie creates these campaigns just to remind people of very simple things that they can do, such as keeping track of food in their fridge and making sure that they use it. And essentially, the message is buy the food you need and use the food that you buy. I think the food waste prevention roadmap, the draft roadmap that is being presented by the government, is very important. There's a lot of different actions to take. While we need to address food waste in the home, we also need to address food waste all along the food supply chain and not point the finger at any particular sector. Everybody needs to take action. And the food waste prevention roadmap is a great step that will pull all the different actions together to make sure that we do all pull in the same direction and we can maximize the impact of that collective action to reduce food waste by 50% by 2030.
Hi, I'm Kenneth Keavey. I run Green Earth Organics. So we've got a 40-acre organic farm based here in Galway. We have the largest home delivery business in Ireland of organic produce to people's doors. We grow loads of stuff, you know. We grow lots of vegetables, lots and lots of stuff on the farm here. And I think one of the keys to the reduction of food waste that we can see in our business is that we grow and harvest and then we deliver direct to the customer. So those things aren't sitting on shelves. The other, I suppose, major benefit is that we can be a lot more flexible with specifications. We're not tied into these kind of constraining specs that supermarkets have. So we can let produce out and we can just decide that it's okay for us. And I think if there was one thing to change that could impact food waste in this country, it's that. Specifications based around size and what a piece of fruit or vegetable looks like. It doesn't need to be so rigorous. Thanks a million.
Hi there, my name's Chris Hill. I'm the Operations Director here at FoodCloud, and we work across Ireland at tackling food waste currently through 2 main solutions. We have our technology-enabled solution that directly links over 600 charity and community groups with food surplus and retailers across the country. That allows us to redistribute food every single day at scale. In addition, we have our warehouse solution. You can see Dublin here behind me, and then we have Cork and Galway. Here we work directly with the food industry to identify and then redistribute large volumes of surplus food to charities across the land. We've grown every year since we started. COVID-19 was a huge time of growth, and this year alone we're looking at redistributing over 3,200 tonnes of surplus food. We recognise though that there's more to do and more solutions to be found. We have 8 short years to achieve UN SDG goals. In reality, that's 90 months and counting. And collaboration is going to be key to getting us there. In tackling food waste, we're creating a more sustainable food system and effective collaboration between food industry players, government, consumers, partners such as yourself and international partners and experts is going to be key to creating a more equitable, inclusive and circular food system. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Conor Spacey. I'm the Culinary Director with FoodSpace here in Ireland. As we know, food waste is a huge problem in the hospitality and catering industry. And for me to eliminate food waste was really about rethinking and reconnecting to our food and taking old practices from the past into today's kitchens and working to eliminate food waste in its entirety. And to really reconnect to our food, I feel that legislation needs to change in terms of education. Education is key to fixing a broken food system throughout our schools and colleges right the way through. and we need a legislative changes there to make this happen.
Whoop. So now on to the more active part of our event. So the next half hour or so of time will be spent thinking through some of the ideas that can bring the food waste roadmap to the next level. And so what we're going to do is we are going to do what's called a dark side ideation, which is an ideation tool to think through, first of all, the terrible ideas, because it's much easier to think about the bad ideas often than the good ideas. So we're going to go into various different breakout groups, and we're going to think about what the terrible things are related to food waste that are currently happening, as well as hypothetical situations that might occur in the future related to food waste. And then once we've spent a bit of time thinking about those terrible ideas, we're going to flip it, and we're going to think about the good ideas and the structures that can prevent those terrible things from happening in the first place, which is what the food waste prevention roadmap is all about. And what we want to happen in this group, through this session, is that we come to ideas collectively that we wouldn't be able to come to on our own. And the board that we will use to come to do this process will be open after the event, as Claire mentioned earlier on, so that people here on this call can use it as a reference point when making their own submissions to the food waste prevention roadmap. Yes, so the agenda, what are we going to do? We're going to spend 20 minutes doing this. We're going to do a quick introduction within the breakout session in the start. Please do use the chat to do this, because we imagine that there'll be between 15 and 20 people in each breakout group. There might not be enough time to get around to everybody. So please just introduce yourself in the chat, who you are, where you're from, why you're interested in food waste. We're going to spend then about 10 minutes thinking about bad ideas, 5 minutes thinking about good ideas, and there might be a couple of minutes at the end as a bit of slack time. Rules in the breakout session, right? There are no bad ideas. We want to come up with as many mad, ridiculous ideas as possible. And then from those ridiculous, outlandish, hypothetical ideas, we can break down what's terrible about those ideas so that we can prevent them from happening in the future. We're going to be using a tool called Miro, which some people might be familiar with. It's a brainstorming tool, and we'll pop the link in the chat in a little second. If you are comfortable with using Miro, please do use it. We want it to be as active as possible. If you're not familiar with it, if you don't want to use it, don't worry. There will be moderators within each breakout group that will share their screen so that you can see what's happening. And as well as that, you can pop vocally with any ideas that you might have, or you can put your ideas in the chat, and there will also be a scribe from the Rediscovery Center within each breakout group that will copy any of those ideas in. So please there's many different channels for you to share your ideas. Also, we think that there's about 60 people on the call right now, so there might be we're hoping for an even distribution among the groups. So there could be about between 12 and 15 people in each group. So you might be asked, if one particular group is oversubscribed, you get to choose which one you want to join. If one is oversubscribed, Claire might pop in and say, hey, I might need 3 volunteers to come join me in another room. And if so, please do volunteer for that. Miro, just to note as well, please don't use the Miro tool in Explorer, because it doesn't really work in Windows Explorer because it's very out of date. And it would work in Google Chrome and Firefox, no bother. And the breakout rooms which will open now are related to primary production and manufacturing, retail and distribution, restaurants and food services, and households. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And everybody should now see the breakout rooms. I'll also pop a link to Miro in the chat so that everybody has access to it. And everybody, yep. Okay, right. There is the link to the Miro board. Off you go. Off you go into your breakout rooms.
Well, you're all very welcome back now, and I hope you had some really fruitful discussions in that session just there. In this final part of today's event, we're going to ask the rapporteurs, who are the Rediscovery Centre staff from each room, to share some of the key recommendations that came out of your discussions. And we're also delighted to welcome in person our expert panel to reflect on some of those recommendations. And the panel includes those who we heard from earlier in the session, including Kenneth from Green Earth Organics, Christopher Hill from FoodCloud, and Conor Spacey from FoodSpace Ireland. So we'll take some feedback first of all, and then we'll go to a discussion on that with our expert panel. So Steve, do you want to kick off first?
I will share my screen. So I had, we might as well start with my group just as I have the screen. Can everyone see this okay? Okay, perfect. Yeah, so some bad ideas that we had. I think, yeah, leftovers, the lack of information. Also, people, one of the points that came up was, which was really important, was that people think that the brown bin equals dealing with the problem, as opposed to the brown bin being the waste, because people think that composting is dealing with the problem. More bad ideas or bad examples, you know, throwing out leftovers, throwing out ugly food, not using the things that they have, not making shopping lists. Another bad idea was that, you know, to make people feel guilty about the food waste that they have, and that, you know, doesn't make people want to engage with the topic. The special offers, yeah, one point that was really raised was special offers in shops, and people being shop assistants, you know, being encouraged to promote those special offers. Portion control was another big one in households. People being, you know, buying more than they need and cooking more than they need. Bulk buying for perishables as well. Bulk buying for food that confusion around sell-by dates, not storing food properly. Another bad idea that came up, or the bad scenario, is that people think that when people are talking about food waste, people usually think about people who have access to gardens or access to, you know, access for storage in their home, space for storage, space for refrigeration. So designing policy also around people who live in apartments or people who live in different scenarios, also very important. In terms of the ideas that can address those, very much focused on education. So education around you know, not only public awareness, but also home economics. That home economics is a very gendered topic, that a lot of school kids, you know, I definitely didn't when I was in school. I went to an all-boys school and I didn't have access to home economics. So to thinking about access to education and who gets access to that education, and who's being encouraged to think about this. Bulk buying for dry items, decentralized waste management. We didn't really get to discuss that in depth. But yeah, essentially kind of education, awareness, changing the norms, changing the parameters, I suppose, for education was definitely something that was seen as a positive idea. I think that was more or less everything. But if I've missed anything, maybe Elizabeth or anyone from my team, if they want to raise their hand or pop it in the chat as something that I might have glazed over. But I'm going to scroll over to restaurants and food services. I believe, Deirdre, you are working in that group.
Yeah, thanks a million, Steve. And I'll just start by thanking the group. I got cut off and brought back into the main room before I could thank everybody properly for their contribution. So thanks a million. Some of our bad ideas, maybe just to touch on them initially, there's some cultural pieces there, I think, around our feeling empowered to ask for things like doggy bags, but also our expectation of what value looks like, and, you know, this pyramid of food maybe that we anticipate on a plate in a restaurant in order for them to provide good value. We also have this whole issue about not necessarily understanding where the losses come from and the data around that in restaurants, poor practices in relation to the segregation of waste also within restaurants and food services, and also in some cases commercial waste, not providing a brown bin option then in terms of dealing with food waste. A big area around communication, similar to your own group, is communication with customers, but also the back of house set up within restaurants and within kitchens themselves, in terms of chefs being aware, being conscious of food waste, how to prevent it, how to spot it, etc. So looking at some of our good ideas, we do have this whole communication piece between customers and those serving the food. We had some lovely ideas as well I suppose in an industry where we have lots of ratings and stars and ways to denote service. A suggestion there around, could we have accreditation based on food waste and having like a zero bin kitchen where there is no food waste, where this could also, sustainability practices could be part of a food industry's branding and be helpful for their business. We did also have suggestions around the use of data in terms of menu planning, ordering, understanding where the losses come from. So a lot more informed decision making that could take place within restaurants. Also the idea of training chefs and maybe some of the practices that were there previously that have been lost or dissipated over time, using all of the ingredients, whether that's vegetable peelings, animal carcasses, etc., to make soups, stocks, sauces, etc. Also preserving food so that the waste is preempted and prevented in that first instance, pickling, drying, etc. And there's much more there, but those just are some of the highlights from the group.
Brilliant. Nice one, Deirdre. So now we will scroll over to retail and distribution. And I believe Ed had that one. Ed, if you're there. Oh, is Ed with us?
Sorry, Steve, I couldn't figure out how to unmute myself because I've got so many screens going on here. I've got like 4 Miro boards in front of me. Apologies. Yeah, quick thanks to the guys who were in my room as well. It was, we barely scratched the surface. We could have talked for a lot longer. But just some of the things that we talked about just in terms of retail and distribution. For one thing that we talked about was liability. It lies both at the start of the supply chain and at the end of the supply chain, and we thought it was a bad idea to make that stronger. So we, in terms of the good ideas, we looked at how to make it easier to make use of all foods along all the way from the guys who grow it, and widening the parameters and what they can do, and just to kind of move on a little bit then in terms of things like fruit and veg that maybe don't look the part, being able to use them to the best of their ability, and almost like educate around them and almost celebrate them. In fact, somebody earlier in one of the presentations alluded to that as well, being able to have more decisions over what goes out. In terms of bulk buying, we see that as a major problem. We want one thing, we can't buy one thing, we have to buy 5 things. We want to come from that from a couple of different point of views. We want to make it harder to want to do that. So in other words, one way that was suggested was if we could purchase by weight as opposed to by packet size, if we could stop driving up the cost of single items and make it more fair. Of course we see the benefits and the need to be able to buy a large packet of things and for that to be financially viable, but there needs to be legislation around bulk buying as well. And use by and best before, that came up in conversation as well. We thought that a good idea would be to educate around that a little bit more. Just because the data's on it doesn't mean it should go in the bin. We need to get better at using our own intuition in terms of whether something is still usable or not. Stopping the markup of smaller portions, I think I mentioned that already. Yeah, the overuse of quality control in general, just back again to the supply chain. We want to kind of explore the idea of making that more wide and not constraining the growers in what they can and can't give to shops. And then lastly, I mean, there's loads more points there, but just the other thing I want to bring up that I thought was interesting was the cost of shops to go zero waste. We had one person in our room that works in a zero waste shop, and very eye-opening in terms of how costly it is. And then we mentioned how easily the country was able to roll out the COVID screens for all shops, and every shop was able to get it within a week. Wouldn't it be great if a similar rule was made or opportunity was made for shops to be able to buy into to making food? You're able to purchase it, but under the constraints of cutting down as much surplus packaging and of course food as possible. So that's just some of the things that we talked about. There was a lot more there, and I wish I had more time to go into it, but great participation. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Ed. Indeed, it seems like every group had so many ideas. And lastly, we're bringing ourselves over to production and manufacturing, which was moderated by Jack. Jack, if you're there.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, again, similar to all the other groups, huge amount of different ideas generated and really diverse discussion. So thanks again, yeah, to everyone who was there for the participation. Yeah, we started off, I suppose, talking about some of those challenges and problem areas, building on Kenneth's comment earlier around supermarket specifications, some of those aesthetic things, regulations that are imposed by retailers. Things came up like the French ugly fruit campaign and, wonky food section, things that might sort of normalize what might be conventionally considered misshapen vegetables and fruit for consumers. We moved on then to, I think, a much broader discussion around things that stimulate demand. So there's a bit of discussion around potential overproduction of food. I mentioned licensing agreements that producers might enter into that might disincentivize them or not reward them for reducing their waste, but might actually provide perverse incentives where those objectives are sidelined. So we had some discussion there around the best ways to get toward that. We mentioned sort of elements around education, green procurement that might target the restaurant side of things, education around that, as well as how to make the reduction of waste more appealing and viable from a cost perspective for producers. So I think we decided that we don't want a sort of heavy-handed regulatory approach, but we want some incentives and some sort of guiding and encouragement to engage in those kinds of practices. We moved on a bit then to, I suppose, some of the incentives for production to move away from a purely commercially driven model and to link a potential school level education program with better awareness among consumers around food waste and also dietary needs, potentially to feed that kind of thinking into policy, and maybe try to reshape that whole economic sector around different principles rather than purely profit and commercialization. I think, there's a lot more there. There's stuff, as you can see on the mural board, around localization, potentially shorter supply chains, ideas such as converting organic waste to biogas. We had some discussion around packaging as well, which I think came up in the other groups. That's interwoven with all of this over-reliance on imports. Some comments around dairy in particular and the need to produce within environmental limits. I'm sure I've missed a lot, but those are just some of the key points that were coming up again. So thanks, to everyone who was there for all of those ideas.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Jack. And Claire, I suppose I'll hand back over to you now to moderate the discussion from the experts. Will I continue to share my screen, or will I?
No, I'd say maybe, everyone can still access the mirror board in any case if you're being able to get into it. So, gosh, there's a lot of themes coming up there. I guess if we start with the end, the last one to be presented there on production, Kenneth, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on these questions around licensing agreements and arrangements with supermarkets that maybe incentivize overproduction, and is that something, I suppose, where is the lever for change there? And then also perhaps if you could touch on the ugly food, which came up in a number of the discussions, and whether that's something, is this about our cultural reaction to food that doesn't look quite right? Is this something that that can be resolved through education, or do we need to find other ways to use that produce?
Okay, thanks a million. All very interesting, and I'm very interested in all of this stuff. So it's great to hear a discussion around it. I guess we've kind of got two aspects here. We've got food production, we're a farm, we also have food distribution. So we've got kind of bit of both aspects going on there. I guess when it comes to things like matching production with supply, it can be very difficult, and to give, I suppose, supermarkets their credit too, it can be hard to understand what your demand is going to be 12 months down the line. And with farming, there's a time lag. Obviously, you can't just have carrots all of a sudden. But I think also, and I know from experience, that there are times when there is, let's say, a very good supply of local produce, but because of the price differential, supermarkets are choosing to source the exact same produce from an alternative country, i.e. importing. So that then is leading to a situation where you have food grown in Ireland that's not going to be sold because it's been undercut, and that's all the profit-driven model of choice, there. So ultimately, there's a responsibility there to for maybe all the supermarkets to level up a little bit and not to be driving the price of food to the unearthly place that it is at the moment when it comes to fresh produce, because in that one fell swoop, if there was more value attributed to the basic ingredients that we're using, then it would help eliminate a lot of the issues we see. Because even in the eyes of the consumer, I'm not talking about driving food to an unsustainable level, but I'm just talking about maybe acknowledging the value of local food and not always going for the cheapest option. So that would help in adjusting the situation in favor of reducing food waste on a national level, I think. We've had that scenario ourselves where we've had to turn in about 10,000 cabbage into the ground this year because we overproduced and our own market couldn't handle that. So, and we had no choice. And that's why I was very interested to hear about the gleaming idea, or gleaning, where if we'd had people there, we could have got them in to harvest that cabbage, So I think there's definitely an element there of responsibility to support local when it's available, and not always to be going for the ultimate cost-cutting measure or the maximum margin, irrespective of, because food provenance is important and food security is important, and it's going to be a shortcut to disaster if we don't support that. So that's one aspect to it. I think the other aspect is all around specifications, and there has been, I guess, a wave and a nod to the idea of wonky veg, but I'd have to question how serious it's been taken from a supermarket perspective. But vegetables that have are a little bit bigger or look differently, and like it was mentioned on one of the boards there, to celebrate that. And we do that a lot, and we find that our consumers really like that, that the vegetables don't all have to look the same. But again, I guess it's required to happen across the board, because not one retailer is going to take that step and that risk at the chance of losing sales. So is there an element of policy required there around specifications to be relaxed? It wouldn't necessarily affect price, and if anything, it might improve it, because it broadens the range of food that's brought into the net that's now acceptable for primary consumption, rather than being kind of shunted off into processing or into composting or into biogas or whatever, which are great, but it doesn't solve the problem fundamentally of growing food for human consumption, So there's a huge opportunity there when it comes to specifications to change, what's allowable. And again, if everybody does it, it'll be a level playing field. And that will mean all those twisted carrots and the carrots that are too big will be eaten by humans. And isn't that a good thing? And it wouldn't cost anybody anything to do that. So my feeling, as far as the low-hanging fruit is concerned, and no pun intended, is that should be a focus. If we focus there, maybe we'd get results, and wouldn't that be terrific for everybody, including the producer, which wouldn't have to leave stuff in the field as a result of the shape of the vegetables.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. I like the low-hanging fruit. Maybe we could have that as a campaign title. Sorry. Yeah, no, absolutely. Makes sense and sounds simple solution for this roadmap. And I suppose be interested to hear as well then from Conor about how restaurants procure this kind of fresh produce, and is the specification ever a barrier to procuring produce? And maybe if you could also touch on what there were so many other things that came up around restaurants, including these kind of other cultural questions around asking for doggy bags and portion sizes as well, Conor. And then we might come on to accreditation and training as well.
Yeah, no problem. I think one of the biggest problems within our industry is the procurement system. And if you think of hotels, restaurants, and especially the bigger companies that have a bigger purse of money to spend to procure with, are because the hospitality industry is a very low margin industry, overheads, costs, and all the colossal, procurement takes the brunt of it. So in a lot of cases, companies their procurement systems are set up to buy best price rather than best produce. And that adds to the broken food system. And that means that in a lot of cases, we're using food that is imported. We're using food that has traveled around the world, that is cheap, that doesn't taste great, and so on, and it's price driven. And I suppose what we've done is we've taken that model and turned it on its head. And the reason being, there's a few steps to it. It's not as easy as that. But what I mean is when food waste is involved, so I always use a very simple explanation when I talk about a head of cauliflower. So for instance, when I say we, restaurants, hotels, chefs buy in a box of cauliflower. So within the cauliflower, we know is the cauliflower itself, the stalks, the leaves, the stem, and this arrives in. For talk's sake, say we're spending €2 for that head of cauliflower. Chefs straight away are trained right from education, right the way through the industry, to use the best part of the cauliflower, which is the florets, the white part, the heart of the cauliflower. So they straight away, they remove the stems, stalks, the leaves, and that's at best gone to compost. What has happened there? Well, what's happened is that 50% of the cauliflower you bought has gone into the bin. So now that cauliflower has cost you €3. Then what you're doing is you're paying for that to be lifted out of the back door. So for another €, say for instance, depending on how it's picked, is it weight, is it lifts, or whatever way your bin provider is doing it. So the procurement system is flawed. So you bought the cheapest cauliflower you thought was available at €2. Before you've done anything in terms of cooking and adding taste, flavor, and texture to it, it's actually cost you €4 because of the practices you're doing in terms of wasting 50% of that vegetable. So if you use that scenario throughout your kitchens, what happens is on any profit and loss sheet, on any finance sheet, there's a wastage percentage. And if you're not putting it in there, your accountant is putting it in there anyway. That wastage percentage can be, large hotels with functions can be up to 10 or 12%. So think about what that's telling you. If you're spending €100,000 in the next 6 months on food, you're saying it's okay to throw €10,000 in the bin. Think about that. Like, think about if you had 10 grand sitting on your table and you set fire to it. That's literally what you're doing by creating the waste. So by eliminating the waste, you've taken that margin and put it back up into your top costs, and it's giving you money to procure better. Better food does not always necessarily mean more expensive. And that's about working within the seasons and working directly with farmers around that. So your first stage is to fix your procurement system. Procurement systems in the hospitality industry, as we know, are broken. They don't work. Buying cheaper is costing you more money in the long run when you add in your waste and your bins and everything else is going with it. So that money you've thrown out is money you could have used to buy better. And that's our first vision of how we came about with FoodSpace and what we did. We're 7 years old now. So when we started, our procurement system was throw out a procurement system that we all know and start with our own procurement system. Then around waste, and it was mentioned in it as well, which is the most important part, is as chefs, we are never identify waste. It's never come up. We're never trained about it. We don't look at it. We don't see it. The first thing to do, we do it in our kitchens, and our new kitchens when we're training new chefs and so on, is to identify waste. So we remove the bins from the kitchen and everything is segregated. So vegetable waste, fruit waste, meat waste, bones, fish bone, whatever it might be, segregated. And at the end of the day, this production waste, or I hate the word wasteful, I suppose there's no other way to call it, is identified. And with that comes, like, chefs are very creative people. So with that becomes the creativity to look at what you don't see, because normally it's in a bin, out of sight, out of mind, to identify it and work on different ways that can be brought in to your menus and into your kitchen. So we would do a lot of fermentation, a lot of pickling, a lot of dehydration, a lot of basically a lot of work that is not new. In fact, it's hundreds of thousands of years old, and we brought that back into a modern day kitchen. We use that to produce different flavors and ferments and pickles and condiments and so on, which means we procure less because we don't need to go and buy the stuff, because we're now producing our own in terms of cultured vinegars and jams and chutneys. It's got better flavor, it's better for your gut, and we put that on the menu. And not just put on the menu, it's about also educating our consumers about what we've done and why, so that they can see how we close the loop on the food system. So it's kind of chicken and egg. It starts with procurement, look into your food waste and what can be done. And the first step is to identify waste. If you're hiding the food waste, it's out of sight, out of mind. It's like blinkers. You're not actually looking at it. And if you're not looking at it, you'll never get over that, because you just don't see it. In terms of accreditation and so on, I think that is so important. And there is some accreditation. We work with the Sustainable Restaurant Association, which are UK based, but they're a European non-profit organization. And we get audited yearly on that, or I think it's every second year now since COVID, but we get audited on everything that we do. And that's about all different elements, from procurement to food waste to working directly with farmers. You know, it's not just about local food. Like, it's about determining, like I always say to people, well, determine what's local food. What is it to you? And what I mean is, local food is not, here's John in a white transit down the road who I buy my vegetables off, but everything's imported. Just because he lives on the road, that's not local. So first of all, it's about defining local food, what that is. And in a lot of terms, when we talk about vegetables, especially horticulture, local to me is the island of Ireland, because we've so many great farmers growing different foods, different seasons. And it's about looking at the entire island of Ireland and using that for horticulture, vegetables and so on. And then down to dairy and meats and so on can be a lot more local, depending on where you are geographically. So it's about taking these steps. And I think the word used throughout the 45 sections is education. So for me, it's about re-educating chefs and about how they look at food and what they can do then to change it. And sorry, one more thing is not to try to do it all in one go. I personally have been investigating the food system for over 20 years. But in FoodSpace, we're 7 years old. It's a constant moving. If you try to do everything at once, you get overwhelmed. It's too much and you'll fail. It's about taking steps, setting goals, and reaching those goals to making it a much better, much more sustainable system.
Baby steps, so fantastic. Thank you. There's so much in that response. And just to mention as well, one of your many hats, Conor, is also contributing to the new EPA Green Enterprise project Wasted that GIY Grow It Yourself is running, which also involves training of chefs, if I'm right, on a course. So we can post some links to that, but it's a really exciting new initiative. So just coming back to that question of cost and quite a few other questions that came up, I might turn to Chris Hill just to mention, I recognize that we are now just over time. I would like to ask another 10 minutes of your time, because I think this is a really interesting discussion, and I can see the chat is being furiously engaged with, which is excellent. So I'll hope to bring in any other questions as well. But I did want to just come to Chris as well in FoodCloud, which I suppose not only deals with food waste, but also the question of cost by redistributing surplus food to charities and those in need. So you might touch on that, Chris, but also I had two other things that came up in the retail distribution group, which were around liability. I don't think any conversation is complete without mentioning liability, and then also the use by versus best before dates, because I understand there's quite a bit of work happening in that space too. So you might touch on those, please, and anything else that you might wish to react to.
Definitely, really interesting to hear the thoughts there, Conor and Kenneth, and obviously to get the feedback from all the groups, and really what the feedback and what the guys have touched on so far is, in tackling food waste, actually what we're doing, a lot of the drivers that are causing that food surplus is possibly used too strong a word, but is a broken food system. Both Kenneth and Conor have looked at it from different angles, but what we've essentially seen is a race to the bottom. A race to the bottom in terms of the cost of food when you or I are at a supermarket purchasing a product, but also then a race to the bottom when it comes to efficiency, when it comes to knowledge through the chain. We have created supply chains that are very good at producing one type of product and one product very efficiently and very from a cost-effective point of view. But that supply chain then can't adapt where there are crop flushes, where there are changes in demand. I'm really interested in that side of things as well in a previous life. So before FoodCloud, I stood over a lot of the development of systems, forecasting and processes for one of the major retailers in Ireland and across Europe. And really the way that supply chains work, the way that retailers work in their stores through to a farmer producing that product at the other end of the chain, that collaboration and the processes between them are key to not only the price that you or I pay for our food, but where the waste occurs at various points in that chain. At FoodCloud, we work with everybody from your initial growers through to the retailers that we see at the end. And if you think about that idea of cost, is Conor touched on it from a hospitality point of view, is we have in a short period of time lost the understanding of waste actually being a cost to a business. So if you take a retailer just in their stores, generally your retailers in Ireland will probably be running at around about 1%, possibly 2% of their overall volume that goes through the store will go to waste. Now that product they're trying to reclaim as much money for as possible through their clearance processes that they have in store. But generally, if you think of the time that goes into putting a label on a product, packaging it up, putting it into the reduce to clear section, once you get to 70%, 80% reduction, you've lost the money by the time you put the label on that product. So really, we need to be doing everything we can before then to stop the waste occurring. Yep, solutions such as yourself, FoodCloud can really step in with the 600 plus charity partners we have across the country, and we really value that stock that we get and we redistribute out to the charities. But the reason that it's occurring is not just accepting that there's a level of waste that a retailer plans in, but it's because that something has changed in demand. It hasn't gone along with the plan that they were expecting in terms of trade. And that can happen at all points of the chain. I'm sat here nibbling away at some blueberries from a well-known retailer in Ireland, and these blueberries came from Morocco. If I was eating those blueberries a month ago, they probably would have come from Peru. If I eat them in maybe 2 months' time, month and a half, they'll start coming from Ireland. Now, the blueberries that have come from Morocco will have travelled across from Morocco to Spain, travelled in a truck, then to Calais, come across another sea, then come across another sea from Wales to get here. Now you think of the forecasting and the planning that needs to go into every single point in that chain. My blueberries have travelled more than I have over the last 2 years. And the scale of our food systems now mean that the minute that anything changes there, waste can occur. Waste can occur in the shop where I'm buying the blueberries, at the importer or at the retailer DC in Ireland, or at the importer earlier on in the chain in Europe. And every time that it's raining a bit heavier today, so there's not as much footfall in the supermarket. That effectively shakes a chain, shakes a rope down the supply chain. That then means that my forecast for the orders for the next day is off. And because our supply chains are so rigid and it's difficult for us to adapt, that then causes waste. So yes, we totally need solutions around how do we deal with the waste better when it occurs. But as Conor and Kenneth have really highlighted, how can we kind of better collaborate, whether it be everything from standards to trade plans to knowledge? Can we better collaborate across an industry to make ourselves more adaptable where unexpected changes come up?
Thank you very much. I think that is a great place to finish on as well. Just conscious of time, I'd love to continue this discussion for much longer. But are there any maybe just last remarks from yourselves, Kenneth or Conor or Chris, based on this interaction or anything you've seen in the chat?
I think probably just very briefly picking up
Yeah.
on some of the messages there in the chat. I think one of the big takeaways from the kind of feedback that's there, and a lot of stuff that the groups have highlighted, is this: there's not one solution to what we're talking about here. It's a mix of everything. It's a mix of everything, as Conor highlighted with education in the industry. I actually didn't touch on the use by best before. There's a huge piece around education from a consumer point of view, and we all have a part to play there. And actually that's linked to a simplification of those dates. Where possible, we shouldn't be using a best before date if the product doesn't require that. You can see some retailers in this country have already made that decision across their fruit and veg ranges. But it's also then education in the industry itself. If I am a buyer in a retailer, if I am a planner in a retailer or an importer, how can I be looking at that value of waste rather than just it getting lost on a spreadsheet where I'm purely driven by my margin or purely driven by our sales target? So if you just look at that angle of education is not quite just the answer. It's education in so many different ways and forms. And the same is true of systems, of packaging solutions, of so many things that we've talked about. And for that to happen, for all these different solutions to be developed, it really is going to rely on collaboration. And that's where we need to bring the industry along with us. It's very easy to highlight where there are obvious issues and opportunities around standards as an example, but we really need to bring the industry with us in the same way that we need to bring consumers and government with us, because by everybody pulling in the same direction, it's going to take us more easily to solutions. By having a bit of a blame game, it really only helps get rid of some emotion in the short term rather than necessarily getting to an answer quicker.
Fantastic. So collaboration is key, and education another big area that needs more work. Kenneth, do you have anything to add to that? Any other things you think must be or should be seen in the roadmap? Or
yeah, I mean, I think the key one is communication and education around how people view food. And I do think, though, honestly, there is a responsibility to level the playing field when it comes to our perception of food, and everybody has a role to play in that. How it can be brought around, it's a very difficult question. The idea is simple, but of course it's always more complex than that. But surely starting with like everybody just being aware and trying to communicate that as much as possible in whatever means we have, then that can, even on labeling or packaging or whatever. But ultimately, price will drive everything. And if things are a little bit more expensive, people will be more conscious of the food that they waste. Ultimately, that's an unfortunate scenario. That's my final thoughts on it.
Perfect, thank you. So more on education, level playing field, and price is king. Conor, do you want to add any last thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's just to echo what Chris and Kenneth both said. Education is key. And also what Chris said on collaboration is hugely important. I mean, for individuals to work in their own silos is not going to share solutions or non-solutions. So it really is about, we know our food system is broken. We know right from farm to consumer, and along every step of the food system, change needs to happen. That won't happen unless we all collaborate, share ideas and share solutions that can affect the entire system for the better.
Excellent, thank you. So on that note, I'd like to hand back to Stephanie just for some closing remarks.
Thanks, Claire. Gosh, such rich sharings. Thank you all so much. I can see there'll be huge input into the roadmap. I mean, I suppose what jumped out at me, and almost everybody has said it, education is the key thing, and it's education across the board. It's education of the public, in you know, the kitchens, producers, you name it. And what was interesting that came up, actually very interesting, came up the whole issue of use by versus best before dates, because that's something that we're very aware there's confusion around that. And we've run a couple of campaigns. In fact, our Stop Food Waste Day campaign just on the 1st of March, which you may have come across, that it was the focus of that was on clarifying the difference between the two. So that's something, it seems like there's more work there for us to do. But education came out very strongly. There's an awful lot, actually. I've taken a lot of notes. I won't take too long because I'm just conscious of time. One of the things, just from a personal perspective, that came up was somebody mentioned, I think it was Steve's group mentioned apartments. Just living in an apartment myself, and seeing all of the waste that goes into the bin, and just thinking about, you see apartment blocks all, you know, being built all over the place. It's going to become a bigger and bigger issue, and I'm really pleased to see in the roadmap that that there will be that, you know, that apartment dwellers will be provided with that infrastructure. It would be great to see something, you know, very strong on that, I think, because that's a growing issue. Yeah, thanks so much for all of your contributions. I think it's been a really rich experience, and that's it. I won't stay on any longer, just conscious of time. Thanks.
Well, thank you, and thanks everyone for staying with us and for all of the engagement. It's been really, really useful. Thanks to the EPA for supporting this event. As we said, the Miro board will remain open. Please do continue to add ideas if you wish, or use it for your own submissions to the consultation, and we can post another link in the chat there. We will be sending around an email afterwards with the link to the consultation and a short questionnaire just to get your feedback on today's session. We'd love to hear how you found it, and we'll also include a link to a new exhibition and showcase that we will be running in the centre to follow on from this event, also on the theme of food waste prevention. It'll be running from the 28th of March to the 9th of April, and we'll be hosting guided tours of innovative food waste prevention initiatives throughout the centre, and really encourage you to come along and enjoy this experience with us. So there'll be an Eventbrite link for that as well. So yeah, thank you again, and wish you a lovely afternoon. Oh, sorry, thank you to the expert panel as well. My goodness, I had that down here. Really appreciate your input, Kenneth, Conor, and Christopher. That was an excellent discussion, and really grateful for your time. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.